Masechet Nedarim Daf Yod Zayin. The theme today is taking a double vow, taking a vow on something and then taking another vow about the very same item. Does that work? Does the second one apply or not? The answer is the Mishnah, Yesh neder betoch neder, ve'en shivu'ah betoch shivu'ah. Literally, this would mean that there is a vow within a vow, but what it means, the betoch, is actually there is a vow upon another vow, or within the same time period as another vow. It does work, whereas for a shivu'ah, one shivu'ah does not apply upon another shivu'ah. Shivu'ah within a shivu'ah, or really it means upon a double shivu'ah. I think it's the language of within to say this is already prohibited in shivu'ah. Can I add another prohibition within that prohibition? So for shivu'ah, it does not work. Here's an example. Kesad. Amad hareni nazir im ochal. Hareni nazir im ochal. A person says, if I eat something, I will be a nazir. So becoming a nazir, this is a vow. And if he eats, and then ve'achal chayav al kol achat ve'achat. So since he ate, that triggers both of these vows, and then therefore he is a nazir twice. If you just say hareni nazir, standard amount is 30 days. So in this case, you have to be a nazir for 30 days, and then start again and be another 30 days, 60 days altogether. Yes, that does apply. However, shivu'ah shelo ochal, ve'achal eno chayav ela achat. If he makes a shivu'ah, I am not going to eat, and then he says again the same thing, promise not to eat, and then he ate. He is liable only one prohibition. Only you have to bring one sacrifice for doing that, because a shivu'ah does not apply to another shivu'ah. Good. That's the Mishnah. And now the Gemara is going to discuss the parameters in which this applies or does not apply. Amar Rav Huna, lo shanu ela da'amar hareni nazir hayom, hareni nazir lemachar. Demigo de kamit tosaf yoma yetera, hayla nazirut al nazirut. Rav Huna is limiting the Mishnah and saying that when we say a neder can apply to another neder, that's only if they are not totally overlapped. There has to be some part of it that does not overlap. So if he says, I will be a nazir today, and then he says, I will be a nazir tomorrow, well, the one starting today is going to be for 30 days. That's true. The next one, he says it's going to start tomorrow. In fact, it will start after the first 30 days starts. But it does apply in that case because he added another day, meaning at the end of the 30 days after today, there's going to be yet another day, certainly, that the second Nazirut will apply. So since the second Nazirut applies to more than the first Neder, therefore the Nazirut does apply to the second one, does apply to the first, and in fact, you'll have to serve them successively 30 days and then another 30 days. Aval amar hareni nazir hayom, and hala nazirut al nazirut. But Rav Huna said, if I say I am a nazir today, and then said the same thing again, then because they're completely overlapped, there's nothing that's shifted over at all. So since the second one does not apply to anything that the first one didn't already apply to, in that case, the prohibition will not apply to another prohibition. So that's Rav Huna. He's limiting the case of the Mishnah regarding neder applies to another neder only if the second neder applies to something that the first one didn't. But if they're completely overlap with no shift over in time, then it will not overlap. Okay, that's Rav Huna's opinion. Ushmuel amar, afilu amar hareni nazir hayom, hala nazirut aleh. Shmuel says, even if he says it twice, it still applies. Hareni nazir, right? He will be a nazir, even if he says it, I will be a nazir today, and he said that again, it will in fact apply. And the second one will apply afterwards. Kind of makes sense for Nazirut, where although he's saying from today, but it doesn't actually start today, even though he said from today, because he already is a Nazir from today. So instead, the obligation gets pushed off to later. So it has somewhere to apply. So even though he said today, since it's going to apply anyway, at a point afterwards. So therefore, for a Nizirut, it does in fact apply twice. That's Shemuel's opinion. All right, Shemuel's opinion seems to be the simple reading of the Mishnah. That in the example of the Mishnah, Hadeni Nazir, he doesn't say today, but it sounds like he's saying, he's not saying tomorrow either. So he's saying the exact same language. So Shemuel does seem to make sense. But Rav Huna says, just conceptually, how could it be that you should apply the same thing twice? If something's already prohibited, then it can't be prohibited again. Like a Shevuah. If I already obligated myself to do something or not do something, then how can I obligate myself in that very same item? That's Rav Huna's opinion. All right, now we're going to challenge Rav Huna a few times. I think 3 times today, and we'll continue more on the next stuff. So first challenge to Rav Huna. Rav Huna adetana en shevuah betoch shevuah, litne yesh neder betoch neder ve'en neder betoch neder. Rav Huna, according to you, how come the Mishnah distinguishes between neder and shevuah? That neder, it does work, and shevuah, a second shevuah, does not apply, if you can make a finer distinction within neder itself. So really, the difference is not between neder and shevuah. The difference is even within neder. Sometimes there is a neder that applies to another, and sometimes not. And here, this is how what the Mishnah should say, according to you. Hadeni nazir hayom, hadeni nazir l'machad, yesh neder betoch neder. If I say I'll be nazir today, and then I say I'll be nazir tomorrow, in that case, yes, neder can apply to another. But hadeni nazir hayom, and neder betoch neder. But if I say the same thing twice, I'm a nazir today, then we do not apply a neder to another. Kashya. So really the Mishnah should say that, because the difference is not fundamentally between a neder and shevuah, but that somehow, because a neder applies to an object, so I could have 2 prohibitions, but a shevuah where it applies to me and I'm already prohibited, so that's why, therefore I can't. That's what the Mishnah sounds like. It's making a conceptual distinction between neder and shevuah. But according to you, Rav Huna, no, it's not the difference between neder and shevuah. It's just about whether it overlaps or not. And therefore you can make the distinction, even a finer distinction, even within neder. Kashya. So that is a difficulty with the Mishnah. We're now going to introduce a second difficulty with the Mishnah. Tenan, yesh neder betoch neder ve'en shevuah betoch shevuah. That's the opening line of our Mishnah, that you can have a neder upon another neder, but shevuah upon another shevuah is not binding. Hechi dameh. Now the Gemara is asking, what kind of cases it's talking about? The cases have to be corresponding, right? Whatever neder, in whatever case neder does work, it has to be a corresponding case that's similar, except that it's a shevuah and where it won't work. So what's the case? Ilema da'amar hadeni nazir hayom, hadeni nazir lemachar, techavata gabe shevuah shelo ochal te'enim, vechazar va'amar shevuah shelo ochal anavim, amai lo hala shevuah al shevuah. If you say, Rav Huna, that is what you say, that the Mishnah is only talking about a case where a person first says, I will be a nazir today, and then he says, I will be a nazir tomorrow, where they do not completely overlap, and that's the only case where a neder applies to another neder. That's what you said, Rav Huna. Well, then let's take a corresponding case regarding a shevuah, also where they do not overlap. For example, if someone makes a shevuah, I will not eat figs, and then he says, I will not eat grapes. Well, why wouldn't the second shevuah apply to the first? They don't overlap. They're talking about 2 different things. Surely both shevuot would be valid, and so that we can't be talking about that case where they don't overlap, because we need a case that a neder does apply, but a shevuah does not apply. So rather, what's the case of neder, so that the corresponding shevuah will not? What's a case where a shevuah does not apply to another shevuah? Kegon damar shevuah shelo ochal te'enim, vechazar ve'amar shevuah shelo ochal te'enim. The shevuah case would be where he says, I'm not going to eat figs, and then again he says, I'm not going to eat figs. The second one does not apply, because he's already prohibited from eating figs on the first one. The second one has nothing to bind onto. It's not valid. Dechvata gabe nezirut hechi dameh damar hareni nazir hayom hareni nazir hayom vekatani yesh neder betoch neder kashya l'Ravuna. So the corresponding case to those two fig swears would be the nezirut, where a person says, I am a nazir today, and he can says the same thing, I am a nazir today. That's the corresponding case when they do overlap, and that's where a neder does apply to another neder, a shavua does not apply to another shavua. So we proved from the correspondence in the opening line in the Mishnah against Ravuna, it has to be a case where there is full overlap, and yet even there, the neder works. So how could Ravuna answer? Ravuna didn't answer the first question, but he has an answer to this one. Amar lach Rav Huna, matnitin damar hareni nazir hayom, hareni nazir lemachar. In fact, Rav Huna says, I think the Mishnah is a case where he said, I'll be a nazir today, and then he says, I'll be a nazir tomorrow, so they don't totally overlap. That's the only reason why the second neder works. What's the corresponding item with Shavua? Not what you said, but rather Dichfata gabe Shavua damar shelo ochal te'enim vechazar ve'amar Shavua shelo ochal te'enim va'anavim de la hayla. It will be a case where a first person takes a swear that I will not eat figs, and then second time he says I will not eat figs or grapes. In that case, it will not take effect. In other words, it's not what you said. You said it's not overlapping at all when he says I'll be a nazir today, and then tomorrow you said that's corresponding to two swears. I will not eat grapes. I will not eat figs. But those are two completely separate things with no overlap whatsoever. But in fact, your case of the case of Nazir, my case, Avuna's case of Nazir, is when there's an overlap of 29 days. It's just what's pushed off only one day is not an overlap. So it's mostly overlap like a Venn diagram. And so the corresponding of Shavua would also be when there's partial overlap. The first one is only figs. The second one, because it has a new item to apply to, so then the whole vow, the whole swear does in fact apply, and it would apply even to the te'enim, such that if a person then ate te'enim, if he ate figs, he would be liable to korbanot. If he did it by mistake, 2 korbanot. Or if he did on purpose, 2 sets of lashes. And so that's where we're talking about de lo hayla. So in fact, according to the Mishnah, in that case where he ate figs and then eats first I won't eat figs, then he says I won't eat figs or anavim, the Mishnah says there's no shavua and pana shavua, so it does not apply. But here we have a corresponding case when there's partial overlap with a neder, it will apply. The same equal partial overlap with a shavua, in fact, does not apply. Okay, good. So now Rav Huna explained himself, and he does have a case. We're going to challenge this because we have another ruling by Rabbah who talks about this case and says that, in fact, the second one will apply. ואמר רבא שבוע שלא אכל תאנים וחזר ואמר שבוע שלא אכל תאנים וענבים ואכל תאנים והפריש קורבן וחזר ואכל ענבים הביאה להו ענבים חצי שיעור ואין מביאים קורבן על חצי שיעור. Rabbah talks about an interesting variant of this case from which we will infer that in the regular case he would be liable to 2. So it's as follows. He makes a swear not to eat figs. Then he makes a second swear not to eat figs or grapes. And then he eats figs, which certainly violates the first one, and also actually violates the second one. But at that point, he separated a korban. Okay. A korban for violating eating figs. As I'm going to bring this korban as a korban hatat, good. And then after he separated the sacrifice, he went and ate grapes. So in that case, the grapes are only half a shi'ur. He doesn't have to bring an offering unless he violates the entire swear, which is, I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. But he only ate grapes. Now it's true, he ate figs before, but he already separated a sacrifice and atoned for the figs. So the figs have already been taken care of, wiped out. So now that he eats grapes, it's only half of a violation, and you don't bring a korban for a half of a violation. It's still not good to do, but you don't bring korban for it. Okay, so that's Rabbah's chidush, that once you separated the sacrifice, then that takes care of whatever you did before, and then the grape stands alone. Alma, what can we infer from Rabba's statement? Hecha dama sheva shelo ochal te'enim v'chazar ve'amar sheva shelo ochal te'enim va'anavim migod echal sheva l'anavim hayla nameh al te'enim. So we see that in this case, when a person swears they will only figs, and then he says, I'm not going to eat figs or and grapes, since the swear does apply to the grapes, because that's a new item that he didn't mention in the first one, therefore the whole swear applies, and applies also to the figs, such that there would be a double swear against the figs. And so you see here that in this parallel case, Rabbah, you brought this as your example, where a neder would work and a shivuah would not work, when there's partial overlap of one day shifted over with the nazir, then neder does apply to a neder, but a shivuah does not apply to a shivuah when the second one partially overlaps but partially doesn't. The first shivuah. That's what you said, Rav Huna, in order to justify your case. But here we see that Rabbah does not agree and thinks that if it's only a partial overlap, then both a neder and a shivuah would both apply. So that can't be what the Mishnah is talking about. Instead, the Mishnah must be talking about where there's full overlap, and it's the full overlap case. That's where a neder works and a shivuah doesn't. This is a challenge to Rav Huna. But Rav Huna has an easy out. Rav Huna la sevira lek Rabbah. Rav Huna just doesn't agree with Rabbah. They're both Amoraim. Rav Huna is allowed to disagree with Rabbah. Furthermore, Rav Huna is a second generation Amorah, and Rabbah is a third generation Amorah. So certainly Rav Huna might have said a statement before Rabbah whatever ever came on the scene. So Rav Huna does not have to answer to Rabbah. So he disagrees, and he thinks that overlapping shivuot, partially overlapping shivuot, do not apply. And therefore, Rav Huna can very easily explain the opening line of the Mishnah, so he solves that case. All right, another challenge to Rav Huna from a Braita. Metibe, Misha Nadar Shete Nezirot, Mana et harishona v'frish korban, v'nish'al aleha. Someone committed himself to be a Nazir twice. And so that would mean that he'd be 30 days and another 30 days. So that works. And then he counted off the first, and he finished. He finished the first term, and he set aside the korban that you have to bring at the end of being a Nazir. But then, before he sacrificed the korban, he went to a rabbi or to a bet din, and he undid his vow. Right? He says, "Oh, I never meant it. I didn't want to do it." And they said, "Okay, you're released from the first vow of Nazirut." In that case, the Braita teaches something interesting, that 30 days in which he successfully completed his Nazirut, that will still count for the second vow that he made. Even though the whole time while he was being a Nazir, we assume that this was for the first vow, but once he undoes the first vow, so there is no first vow anymore, the second vow is still around, and you don't have to start that one all over again. That can apply to those 30 days that he already did, and then he'll bring that korban that he set aside and bring it for the second vow, and then he'll be done. Good. That's the Braita. Now, we ask, what exactly is the case? If it's talking about a case that Rav Huna said, where he says, I am a Nazir today, and then he says, I'm going to be a Nazir tomorrow, then how could the second vow be fulfilled with the first 30 days? Right, we're talking about a case where he said, I'll be a Nazir today, I'll be a Nazir tomorrow. That day, that first day, when he's saying it, starts day 1. 30 days later is his last day from the count of the first Nazirut. And that's when he finished, and he set aside a korban, and that's the day that he went and undid the vow. And then, yet the Braita says he's done with the second one, but the second one is not going to be done until the next day. Because the second vow started a day later and is going to finish a day later. So how could it be that he ends a day later, right? And this would be a challenge to Rav Huna. Ela peshita damar hareni nazir hayom. So it must be, this Baraita can only be understood if it's talking about a case where he says, I am a Nazir today, and then said a second time, I am a Nazir today. And that's why the end of the first one is the same as the end date of the second one. So when he undoes the first Nizirut, the second one also ended that day. And so that's why the Baraita says that fulfilled his obligation for the second day. So it makes perfect sense if you say Nazir Hayom, Nazir Hayom. It does not make sense if you say Nazir Hayom, Nazir Lemachar, which is what Rav Huna wanted to say. And so they see that this is a rejection of Rav Huna, right? It would not work. This proves that Nazir Hayom does take effect. And that goes against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says Nazir Hayom does not take effect. Right? He said it has to be somewhat not overlapping, but here it's totally overlapping, and yet it does take effect. Challenged. This looks like a conclusive refutation of Rav Huna, but at last we saved the day. It could be that there was one layer that said final rejection. That's it. Stop there. But another generation came, and sharet teshuvah lo nitnalu. You can always find an answer, an explanation, and so they came up with one. Lo leolam harini nazir hayom harini lemachar. This baraita also, we can reconcile it with the case where he said, I'll be nazir today, I'll be a nazir tomorrow. Umay al talo. What does it mean that those 30 days are count for him for the second nazirut? It means it means except for, besides the extra day. In other words, now that he undid the first vow, now the second vow is at day 29. So all he has to do is be a Nazir for one more day, and then he'll be done. Right? So it's very easy, not a big deal to explain this. Al talo means that counts for him. It goes towards the 30 days that he will need for the second vow of Nazirut. Or another answer, or it could be a case where he accepted two obligations to be a Nazir simultaneously. In other words, he said on day one, he didn't say two separate statements, I am going to be a Nazir today, period, I'm going to be a Nazir today, but rather he said, I'm going to be a Nazir twice, and so that he will then have to bring twice the korbanot. He'll get twice the punishment if he doesn't. That's what he said. And so, according to that, it would mean that Nazirut, if he said it simultaneously, I'm going to be Nazir twice, then yes, that would take effect, and he would have to, and he could serve it at the same time. Those 30 days will be the fulfillment of both of them. On the other hand, according to Rav Huna, and this answer is for Rav Huna, if he said Hareni Nazir, period, Hareni Nazir is two separate statements, according to Rav Huna, that would not take effect because you can't apply a neder upon another neder. However, if it's one neder in which you say I'm a Nazir twice, that works. So yes, you can become a double Nazir at the same time, simultaneously, but you cannot say I'm a Nazir, because then that can't apply to the previous one. That would not work at all, according to Rav Huna. We're not done with Rav Huna. We're going to ask him some more questions, but that'll wait till the next stuff. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen v'amen.